Virginia Center for Politics.
Good afternoon and welcome to the UVA Center for Politics Global Perspectives on Democracy Program's Ambassador Series and the opening event of the International Forum on Diplomacy. My name is Damon Irby and I'm the Director of Global Initiatives at the Center for Politics. Today we welcome His Excellency Motaz Zahran, Ambassador of Egypt to the United States. Egypt is a nation that has fascinated people around the world for ages, and that certainly applies to our founder of the university. In 1802, Thomas Jefferson was gifted by French writer and Middle East traveler Constantin Francois de Chaboeuf a detailed replica of Cheops' Great Pyramid at Giza. It was noted as even including sand and pebble of the desert at its base and was displayed prominently on the mantle in the entrance hall at his home Monticello. Its placement near a sculpture that Jefferson thought was Cleopatra and a map of Africa nearby may have created what amounted to an Egypt corner, indicating his interest in this grand ancient culture. Fast forward to today, and Egypt continues to be an important country in the North Africa and Middle East region, and a key player in maintaining stability in the process for peace between Israel and Palestine. Still, there are many questions that we have about the internal affairs of Egypt and other challenges within the region that we look forward to learning more about today. His Excellency Motaz Zahran presented his credentials as Ambassador of Egypt to the United States in September of 2020. Previously, he served as the Assistant Foreign Minister and Chief of Cabinet for Egypt's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He also served as the Ambassador of Egypt to Canada and held numerous positions within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, such as Deputy Assistant Foreign Minister and advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the Middle East peace process, Palestine, Israel, and Egypt's relations with the United States. He also previously served at the embassy in Washington as a political counselor and congressional affairs officer and chargé d'affaires, which is a diplomat who serves as an embassy's chief of mission in the absence of an ambassador. Ambassador Zahran, we thank you so much for speaking with us today, and we truly appreciate the time you're giving us, and we're excited about you feeding our interest in Egypt. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Irby, and let me also, express my, happiness and gratitude to have been granted the opportunity to be with you today and discuss issues that students and faculty members are interested in as they relate to Egypt. So it's a great privilege.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much. Is there an opening statement you would also like to give today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And let me just say that, maybe at the outset, a quick overview of Egyptian-American relations, and say that Egypt and the United States are long-standing strategic partners with a wide spectrum of shared interests. Next year, we will be celebrating 100 years of diplomatic relations between our countries. And over the past century, the Egyptian-American partnership has grown, has become even stronger. And the avenues of cooperation have expanded to encompass all fields from security and military cooperation to trade and investment and consultation on regional issues, as well as culture and education. And of course, in the midst of all this, the importance of people to people in their interactions between both countries. In 1979, Egypt signed the first peace deal with Israel, and it was the first between Israel and an Arab country. So Egypt was the pioneer in planting the seeds of peace. It is difficult to imagine how the region would have looked like today without Egypt's groundbreaking initiative that paved the road for peace to expand, the latest of which is the Abraham Accords. So this year has been packed with significant milestones in Egyptian-American relations. And last month witnessed the Bright Star operation, which is a major joint military exercise between our two countries and armed forces that has been taking place since 1980. The last iteration of the Bright Star was in 2018, and its resumption this year reflects the deep-rooted ties between our armed forces in their efforts to reinforce peace and security and stability in the Middle East. Economically, bilateral trade figures for 2021 show a 15% increase compared to the previous year, and Egypt's position jumped from 62 to 59 on the list of top exporters to the US. The trade deficit has also declined by 25%. American investments are expanding in all sectors of the Egyptian economy, from retail to energy, infrastructure, as well as financial services and communication technology. Now, on the regional level, Egypt's role is a pillar of the strategic relations with the United States. Our leadership has been instrumental in brokering the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel in May. And our engagement in regional files is cemented through the trilateral cooperation mechanisms with Iraq and Jordan on the one hand, and with Greece and Cyprus on the other. So Egypt spearheaded the efforts to launch the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, whose charter entered into force in March this year, further strengthening our status as an energy hub in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Now, our regional efforts are driven by a vision that rests on human development and stability as bedrocks of and for our societies to grow and flourish. After years of turmoil that shattered growth prospects and handicapped the enormous potential of our people. Now, let me just say that last month, Egypt issued the first national strategy for human rights, a comprehensive document that outlines Egypt's vision for the protection and promotion of human rights in their totality, including political, economic, and social, and details the steps undertaken to foster human rights on the legal, institutional, and societal levels. This document is a homegrown endeavor that spanned over, in the effort, 3 years to support the strides our country has managed to accomplish in urban development, modernizing infrastructure, and reforming our educational and healthcare systems. The human rights strategy crowns the unabated work of our government and advances the tapestry woven by the Egyptians to transform their country into a modern, developed nation it deserves to be. So I would like to especially emphasize that progress recently achieved with regard to the status of women and in the field and the realm of religious freedoms. We are proud that Egypt's cabinet today and parliament have the highest female representation in Egypt's history, comprising 25% of cabinet members, women, 27% of seats in the House of Representatives, 12.5% of the Senate, and 25% in local councils. So Egypt also issued a national strategy to address violence against women. And starting from October this year, women will be allowed for the first time to assume judicial positions in the State Council and in public prosecution. So women are prioritized in our social security schemes. And in the aforementioned human rights strategy, as crucial partners and contributors to our country's development. So let me just reiterate, after these opening remarks, my pleasure and privilege to speak with you. You represent, as students at the university, the rising generation, entrusted with addressing some of humanity's toughest challenges, such as climate change and pandemics, and also global inequalities in income and opportunity. I wish you all the very best for our dear students in their studies and future careers and endeavors. I look forward to a meaningful discussion and a valuable exchange of ideas on how to support the Egyptian-American partnership. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I'd like to just open up, basically addressing why we are not in person today. And obviously, it is due to COVID. Our desire was that we would be together. And you've actually been in office entirely during the COVID period. And I can imagine how this impacts you and your outreach to the public and to the United States. But I have a question regarding circumstances in Egypt right now. Recently, Egypt's government established a policy where it will soon require its 6 million employees to have a vaccination certificate or show a weekly negative COVID test before entering their workplaces. Members of the public will be required to show proof of vaccination prior to entering public buildings as well. This is obviously we're experiencing similar circumstances here in the United States, and I'm curious, can you tell us about Egypt's vaccination efforts and how these new public policies have been received there?
Well, absolutely. Let me start by saying, yes, I've been just over a year now into my tenure, and I've been restricted like everyone else, not being able to reach out and to, start my functions as an ambassador here with everyone. So I've been confined to the four walls of this office for a long time, and I'm assuming that most of us have been also confined. But here on COVID, let me say that Egypt has managed to strike a delicate balance between both health precautions and exigencies and the economic considerations as well, to protect the people's, of course, health while not disrupting their livelihoods. Many in Egypt depend on their small businesses to cater to their lives, and as a source and an important source, and for many, the sole source of their income. So how can I say, putting the economy to halt was not really an option. So the economy had to keep on running at a lower level, but at the same time prioritizing issues related to overcoming and mitigating the effect of COVID on the society. So this policy has enabled Egypt to be one of the very few countries in the Middle East that have managed to sustain a positive economic growth rate during a COVID year, and also minimize the hurtful impact of the pandemic on the people's income. And more recent measures include a number that I might wish to enumerate. One, since August 8th, the Ministry of Health was instructed to expand the distribution of vaccines to 500,000 persons daily. And that is a huge undertaking in Egypt. Two is a plan that was set to vaccinate as many students and teachers in schools and universities by September 2021. And I think we've accomplished that, and we've ticked the box 3 medical convoys were dispatched by the Ministry of Health to vaccinate government employees with a strict timeline that extended to late September 2021, and that it has been honored. 4 is Ministries of Labor, Higher Education, and Tourism have prepared lists of Egyptian citizens traveling for work, study, or tourism to facilitate and expedite their vaccination before travels. So all these measures have been well received by the general populace, by the public in general, and compliance so far has been actually quite impressive and maybe has exceeded the expectations back home as well. So the question remains here and there, and I think in other countries around the globe, how to deal with those who continue to resist the notion of being vaccinated. So there are those who completely reject the idea, but to enforce it on them is something that no one can do. It's your own decision to get vaccinated or not. The main thing is to get educated and to get to know what exactly entails or what are the repercussions of not being vaccinated. Now, let me just say that despite the fact that here in the US, most of us have been vaccinated twice, the advice we get is beware, because you could still be getting it. And in Egypt is actually undergoing a number of programs in order to spread the culture and education, but also to explain the negativities that might be an implication of not being vaccinated. So we're on a trajectory, and we're happy that the US has also provided Egypt with, through the COVAX facility, millions of vaccines, whether they're Pfizer's or Johnson's or even Moderna's, who will be coming into Egypt as well. So we have all sorts of vaccinations in Egypt, including the AstraZeneca, including the Sinopharm from China, and of course all the vaccinations you have over here. So it's moving ahead quite smoothly, and I think it's only natural that places of public attendance, at least the employees should be vaccinated, fully vaccinated, so as to mitigate any kind of repercussions on the general populace.
Sure, absolutely. So, being here at a university, there are many on our university grounds have a key interest in human rights. And so we have a number of questions that relate to that. It was announced just a couple of days ago by the Egyptian government, the ending of the state of emergency in Egypt, which is obviously big news and seems to be a very positive step. Critics have said that the state of emergency has been used for more than establishing security, but also silencing dissident through a wide variety of means. Many human rights organizations are expressing skepticism on whether the lifting of the state of emergency will actually improve individual freedoms within Egypt, and that other laws in effect are being used for similar purposes. So how would you respond to these concerns? And do you believe we'll soon see statements from these groups that actually, that there's actual progress from their perspective being made?
Well, absolutely. This is a development that is welcomed in Egypt. Some seem to look at each and every development that happens in a negative light. But the fact is that the state of emergency has been the name of the game in Egypt for a number of years. And that state of emergency has been in place in order to immune the society and the nation from the dangers and the risks of terror groups that operate, unfortunately, in Egypt and throughout the region. But we've been on a campaign to eradicate the sources of danger, whether in Sinai or on our western borders with Libya. Well, we've actually seen a number of attacks that came through our borders with the quagmire and the state of fluidity that exists in Libya that have targeted our population, and innocent civilians have lost their lives, but also men in uniform who are out there to protect the country and the society have also lost their lives. So when we have been able to achieve important milestones in our fight against terror, and we've come to recognize at a certain point of time, which was just a day or two back, that the state of emergency is no longer needed because of the successes we've had on the ground in eliminating all the danger spots with those who operate under extreme radical and fanatic ideologies, as we see elsewhere in the region. So it should be a development that people should welcome. Given the fact that we also have a new human rights strategy, as I've mentioned in the very beginning, there will be a series of steps and tasks that will be taken and timelines that the government will be bound by in order to continue to foster the culture and to extend the new spirit and the letter of the strategy into laws and rules and regulations. So we will be seeing in the coming weeks or month an action plan that is currently being devised by the Supreme Committee that has been established. And part of the endeavor is to look into all the laws that govern the land of Egypt in order to pinpoint where amendments are needed and where they should be more aligned with the constitution of Egypt, but also by the with the aspiration of the people. So skeptics, I don't want to be too harsh on them, but it's a bit too early if the state of emergency has been lifted just a day or two ago to voice skepticism. And it's a bit too early for those who look at the human rights strategy as a fig leaf, as they've put it, or some of them have put it. But it is actually the time to be more open and to be to embrace a much more positive attitude in terms of looking at a society and a country and a nation that is in transformation. So the country is transforming, and what we need to do is to be active members when it comes to of a society, when it comes to providing all the intellect that is needed for that transformation to match the bar of their aspirations and their expectations.
Do you foresee that those individuals in Egypt who might have been not a part of terrorist organizations, but simply have different perspectives than the government, do you foresee those that have been arrested for particular reasons ultimately being relatively quickly released, those who might be in prison for more political purposes, or who might have, obviously you have significant security concerns in Egypt. And, there's a possibility that some might have been brought in who are not terrorists, but just simply have different views. Do you foresee a certain number or some of these people being released in due time?
Well, a number of releases have already happened. And let me just quickly make a reference to the need, or yes, let me say the need for people to be able to delineate in their minds those, and in their assessments, those who aspire for change and who have a different viewpoint on how policies are implemented or even are devised, and those who use different ways and means in terms of propagating for violence and hatred and terror and intimidation and incitement. And all these are crimes that are punishable by the law. So if I'm using, and this is something that I think more clarity needs to be out there, if you are a believer in the notion of rights in general are absolute, then you'll be missing the point, because rights, freedoms, and liberties are guaranteed by constitutions and legal documents, but at the same time, they have their own limits in terms of not being absolute. So my right starts and ends where your rights start and end. So if I'll be exercising what I call rights in their absolute terms and infringing on society as a whole and the people, then I'll be subjecting myself to the law and to the courts. So this has to be clearly made to each and every individual who thinks that there is a repressive endeavor in Egypt to keep people from talking, or to keep people from expressing views, or to keep even people from demonstrating. Now, there has been cases that were reviewed in Egypt whereby the public prosecutor, who is an independent judicial body, has decided that these cases should not continue to be on their desks. And as a consequence, those who have been detained have been released. Now, is everything perfect in Egypt? Well, the answer is a simple no. And is any other country perfect, including here in the US? The answer is simply no. But where is the trajectory? And this is what we need to comprehend and digest. If the trajectory is one that is promising, then the only natural thing to do is to either embrace the new trajectory that Egypt is on, or to constructively and positively get yourself engaged in discussions that would lead towards a better Egypt and a better United States.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I'm going to now begin some questions that are from students. And the first one is from a student who emailed me. His name is Ali Jarrah. He is a first-year student here at the University of Virginia. So here's his question. In 2012, Mohamed Morsi became Egypt's first democratically elected president, a significant milestone that created great optimism in the country. However, after the 2013 military coup, it seems to me democratic freedoms have regressed in Egypt. According to Freedom House, civil liberties, including press freedom and freedom of assembly, are tightly restricted. In the last Egyptian presidential election, President Sisi received over 97% of the vote, running virtually unopposed, raising great concern by human rights organizations. How can the Egyptian government represent its people when its people have no meaningful say in their government? And why has the government fought so hard to curtail the freedoms that the Egyptian people fought for during the Arab Spring?
Well, thank you for this question, and it gives me the opportunity and chance to clarify some of the misconceptions. Now, of course, I do not entirely agree with the premise of the question, which lies in the notion of military coup. And let me say that the military coup does not properly characterize what happened on June the 30th, 2013 in Egypt. On that day, millions of Egyptians, 30 million according to some accounts and estimations, and the images and the videos are available online for everyone to check, took to the streets to defend their country from being hijacked. And not only in both character and identity of the country and the people, but also in their culture and heritage by a fanatic group whose one-year rule was marred by state-sponsored violence and terrorizing citizens. So the Muslim Brotherhood's exclusionary discourse, as was and exhibited in Egypt, and as well as their ideological charged statements on women and Christians and Jews, led to a public backlash, a normal and natural public backlash, because Egypt has always been a country of moderation. And this all culminated on June the 30th. Egyptians from all walks of life broke out, young and old, men and women, rich and poor, Muslims and Christians alike, rural and urban, you name them. They came with a desire to protect and support the identity and the character of the nation, and to keep it immune from being hijacked. And the armed forces in Egypt have come to the support and the rescue of the outcry of the general populace. So they've somehow shielded them from reprisals. So that is not to say that the status, again, of rights and freedoms and liberties in Egypt is perfect. And this is something we never contended. But it is definitely a work in progress. And many other countries around the globe have similar circumstances and similar situations. So, as I mentioned in my remarks and my answer to your first question, now Egypt has issued the human rights strategy, which is one that is a comprehensive document and has basically 4 basic pillars. And it includes, of course, all sorts of rights that in some developed nations, these rights are taken for granted. And let me just say economic and social specifically. When you have poverty, when you have lack of adequate housing, when you have lack of access to your livelihoods in general, whether it is food, whether it is water, it all becomes a necessity. And above all these rights is the right to live, the right to life. And this is one that we've prioritized in the past few years. But we've recognized through our human rights strategy that what needs to come to the same bar of priority are the different sets of rights that haven't been given priority in the past. These are political, mainly, and civil. So if the country has a trajectory towards, augmenting that kind of attention to these kinds of rights, then it would be an endeavor that needs to be supported, as opposed to shooting it down before it even starts. So let me just say again that the endeavor here and the document that we've adopted is homegrown again, and its target is to reinforce the strides of the country. And as I've mentioned, in the field of women and youth and people who have special needs, and they've been prioritized. And as we look towards expanding in our political and civil spheres, our judicial system as well is one that needs to be, again, revitalized in order to cope with the new trajectory we're on. And let me just give an example of the NGOs. The president has declared 2022, which is next year, very soon, as the year of the NGOs in Egypt, after the adoption of the most progressive NGO law in Egypt that has a number of provisions that have never figured in the past law. And this is why we've amended it, and we've issued a new law, completely new law, after a huge societal interaction with the NGO community as well. So we have in Egypt 55,000, at least, NGOs that operate freely without any kind of inhibition. This is indicative of where we're headed and where we're going. And the trajectory here is reflective of the provisions of the strategy as well. So the work is in progress, and the mechanisms will be devised very soon for implementation. And it will never fall short of timelines and the targets, and also the benchmarks that need to be met.
Thank you. I now have a series of students who are actually with us today. The first one is Susan Easterday. Susan, would you join us and give us your question?
Hi, thank you for being here, Mr. Ambassador. Just last week, the first 98 female judges were sworn in to serve on Egypt's State Council, which handles administrative disputes, disciplinary cases, and appeals. Women in Egypt have been calling for access to positions such as these for quite some time. What makes this the right time to open up the State Council to women? Are we on the cusp of more opportunities being open to women in Egypt?
Well, thank you, Susan. And let me just build on what I've said in my introduction and also in my answers to the previous questions. Now, indeed, we can say that Egyptian women are living in what a number of pundits back home have called the golden age of opening doors, of overcoming barriers, and breaking the glass ceiling. This reflects, of course, an enlightened trajectory and a society that is incrementally but solidly embracing the massive potential and valuable contributions of women. Now, just to give you a flavor, let us not forget that women in Egypt have ruled over the land of Egypt in the past, and Dr. Irby, you've made in the introduction, you've laid out a picture of Egypt and its history, but then again, one must not lose sight of where we were in the past and where maybe we have regressed in our transformation and where we have to revive our past here once again. So, who have ruled over the nation for millennia. Nefertari, Hatshepsut, and Cleopatra, they're just a few prominent examples. Now, the president of Egypt has recently issued a decree allowing women for the first time to work in judicial positions in the State Council, but also, Susan, in public prosecution. Hard one accomplishment for Egyptian women, and the decree has been put into effect. The decree has been put into effect at the beginning of this month. Now, let me emphasize that this is no grant to women, but an inherent right, and both an acclaimed and reclaimed liberty. So as I outlined again, we are proud that the Egyptian cabinet and parliament now have the highest female representation in Egypt's history. 25% of cabinet members is indicative, and over 12% in the Senate, over 25% in local councils. These are all numbers that we've never seen before in Egypt. And they've not come about by a press of a button or a simple click on your mouse. So we have 162 female representatives in parliament. And that in the past was probably unimaginable. It is higher in the number than the total number of women in the 117th Congress here in the US, which coincidentally is the highest number in the US itself of women who are represented in congressional history. So we can safely say that women in Egypt are enjoying an unprecedented wave of opportunity and empowerment that they deserve. And we have the obligation to make sure that their rights and freedoms are fully protected. So this is the new Egypt we're talking about, and an Egypt that is also reflective of its own dynamics. When you say elections, then it is the elections that have brought these women to the helm of their positions, as opposed to cabinet members who are appointed. So you can always say that, well, you've appointed these members as a camouflage in the cabinet, but you cannot say the same thing when it comes to elections in parliament. So it's indicative of a trajectory, and I'm happy that this is happening, and hopefully this will even expand more.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My next student now is Nahor Hagos. Nahor, could you join us and give us your question? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. My question is, the Camp David Accords in 1979 made Egypt the first country in the region to establish diplomatic ties and peace with Israel. And in addition, a little over a year ago, we saw the Abraham Accords signed, establishing diplomatic ties between Israel, Iran, Morocco, the UAE, and Sudan. Mr. Ambassador, what do you think needs to happen for other Arab League nations to normalize relations with Israel? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and a very pertinent and timely question. Let me say that Egypt was definitely the leader in establishing Middle East peace, and with the Camp David Accords, it has been, simply groundbreaking in '79. Egypt led the way to peace with a firm conviction that war cannot be the normal state of affairs in the region, and that war has never led to any kind of permanent solutions to the conflicts in the region, and the core conflict we all know of. And that for the people to live freely and safely, the seeds of dialogue and coexistence had to be planted. Now, Egypt led the path despite an unfavorable regional sentiment at the time, and remained committed to the endeavor despite the backlash for over 40 years. Time has proven that farsightedness of Egypt's vision, and of course the Abraham Accords has been the latest, and they could have not have happened without Egypt's peace initiative. So as we weathered the backlash in the Arab world, We were boycotted. We were thrown out of the Arab League. We were sanctioned. And by weathering all this, we've been able, and standing our ground, we've been able to transform mindsets. And that is not to be belittled at all, because in '88, the Arab world has returned to Egypt, and not Egypt that has returned to the Arab world, despite Egypt being, evicted. And we say this because we never changed course. It was the Arab world that decided to have a renewed kind of look, and they revisited in their own sane minds what Egypt has done and what the right thing to do is. So we aspire to, we continue to, and we've led efforts to bring Palestinians and Israelis together. And we continue to work towards the resumption of dialogue, of talks. We recognize that this very moment in time, it might be a bit difficult because of a different government in Israel today that does not believe in the two-state solution. But this should not sway us from continuing to exert the effort and to continue to establish the needed mediation role, if I may say, in terms of looking at what could be confidence-building measures and what confidence-building measures could lead to, maybe not today, but tomorrow. And these confidence-building measures are diverse. There are also a number of steps that need to be taken in order to preserve the notion of the two-state solution, which relates to a number of practices on the ground in Palestine that do not cater to the objective. And prime among them is the settlement policy that continues to erode the land in Palestine, is the policy that continues to see a practice of land confiscation, of eviction from houses, forced evictions. So all these practices need to come to an end and need to halt for the endeavor that Egypt has always been, at the forefront of, in terms of bringing back the necessary and conducive atmosphere for talks to be established, direct talks between Palestinians and Israelis. Now, I emphasize here on the Palestinian question because it is simply the core. It represents the core conflict in the region, and we've always contended that by working towards easing the Palestinian conflict and catering to the needs of the people, and also recognizing the need of need of Israel to guarantee its own security and for its own people, we will only be doing ourselves a favor and for our next generations favors as well. So we're committed and we're working to continue to exert everything we can on the peace front.
So thank you. I have another student who has a question that's similar to this one. It's Isabel Dlabach. Isabel, would you like to join us and give us your question, please?
Hi, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being with us today. As you've said, Egypt has continued to serve as an important broker in the peace process between Israel and Palestine. Last May, Egypt mediated a ceasefire following 11 days of conflict in Gaza and is once again being called upon to serve as a bridge between the two. In mid-September, President al-Sisi met with the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in Sharm el-Sheikh, where they discussed the bilateral relationship and regional developments with a particular focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Can you tell us about the latest steps Egypt is taking to help assure that the fighting that occurred in May will not reignite, and the possible steps needed to reestablish a more enduring peace process?
Well, thank you, Isabel, for capturing the highlights of Egypt's regional efforts that have been exerted just recently. You're right, Egypt was instrumental in brokering the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel last May, and is widely considered to be an honest broker that enjoys credibility among both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, with emphasis that Egypt has not any kind of other ulterior motives. So what we envisage and what we aspire for is simply lies in a just and lasting peace, growing and increased prosperity, and of course sustained progress. Now, these are our ultimate objectives in a region that must be anchored in security and solidity and stability. So Egypt had in fact contributed to the reconstruction efforts in Gaza in the aftermath of brokering the ceasefire. And we've allocated $500 million as a grant to Gaza reconstruction. And we continue to, emphasize and to impress on both sides to return to the negotiating table. We are alarmed, though, by some of Israel's insistence to refrain from dialogue with the Palestinian president, who represents the authority in Ramallah. And we continue to urge them to show signs of goodwill to move beyond the current gridlock. It's important to emphasize that, as time passes, we will continue to see the erosion of the two-state solution. And if we do not impress as an international community in a meaningful way, things will probably move out of hand. And this is why we are proponents of the confidence building measures that need to be in place sooner rather than later. We are proponents of reinvigorating and revitalizing the role of the quartet when it comes to the peace efforts in the region. We have also engaged with Jordan and France and Germany in what we call the Munich Group in order to also spearhead an effort towards highlighting the need for talks to happen and to occur. So this is what we're doing. So we're doing this in tandem with another effort on the Palestinian reconciliation front. And we need to be able to bring the Palestinians together, who unfortunately have a divide since 2007 between Gaza and Hamas over there and the Palestinian Authority and Fatah in the West Bank, but also with the other factions of the Palestinians, in order to reach a common denominator by which the Palestinian voice will be unified. And this is a very difficult endeavor, but nevertheless, we are committed to continuing the efforts we're exerting. And I think the efforts of Egypt are, in this domain, continue to be extremely relevant and very well taken and recognized by the international community.
Thank you. So we now have time for our very last question, and it goes to Jack Phoenix. Jack, can you give us your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us today. This is a bit of a general question, and you've already touched on it a bit, but I think it's especially important for students and Americans more broadly. What is the biggest misconception you see in American perceptions of Egypt? More specifically, is there something in the past or more recent history of Egypt that you think more people should be educated on?
Well, thank you, Jack, for the question. It's a broad one, which probably needs a whole event. But let me try to capture some of my thinking here, and maybe say that as I served here in Washington, D.C. twice, now as ambassador and previously as a congressional officer at the embassy about a decade ago, I always feel touched by the sense of admiration and even fascination with which Americans speak of Egypt's history and civilization, and Egypt being a cradle. I sincerely hope that Americans can get to know more about modern Egypt. Egypt has moved beyond and maybe on the platform of its history, but has moved beyond the confinements of the past. And the massive transformation that is currently ongoing right now in Egypt just presents a new Egypt in a new light. So Egypt is building a new capital alongside 14 other new smart cities in tandem, in parallel. All these projects are humongous, are huge. Investments are huge inside Egypt. It all also is an exigency by virtue of a growing population that has exceeded 100 million. Estimates are 104 now. And it is evolving. It is ever evolving. Egypt today is also becoming an energy hub in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially clean energy, with one of the largest solar power parks in the world, located in Aswan in Upper Egypt or Southern Egypt. There are significant renovations of the country's infrastructure, roads and bridges and tunnels. And one wouldn't imagine that this is the Egypt that we read about in history books, because it's truly transforming. So there are significant renovations of the country's infrastructure. The educational and healthcare systems are being completely revamped and reformed in Egypt to better address the challenges of the 21st century. And travel to Egypt is totally safe. So people who continue to be a bit weary about whether to travel or not, given what they hear in the news and what they see in some reports of the dangers of travels and the risks of travels, let me say that Egypt offers some of the most beautiful touristic experiences in the world that caters to every audience, cultural, historic, leisure, and spiritual. So Egypt has moved a lot in the past 4 to 5 years on a new path of, let me say, facelifting. And modern Egypt is coming into being and is presenting itself to Egyptians before to foreigners. But this is something that I think needs a lot of attention on our part here, our cultural office, our Egypt Air office, our press office. All these need to come together in a much more efficient way, and this is probably a responsibility that I should be overseeing in order to put out there a picture of the new Egypt that seems to be evolving away from attention over here. So this is probably what I would have to say and answer on your lovely question.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, we thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's certainly given us a lot to think about, and I hope everyone who's watching will take some time and learn more about Egypt today, where it is, where it's been, and where it's headed. Ambassador Zahran, thank you. We hope to see you in person one of these days.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Irbi, and let me just say that I've enjoyed the discussion with your good self and the students at the university, and hopefully next time we'll be in person whenever conditions permit. And all the very best to you, and all the very best to all the students and the different faculties of the University of Virginia.
Thank you much, sir. We really appreciate you. And to our audience, we hope you come back tomorrow for the former ambassador of Afghanistan, Ambassador Roya Rahmani. She will be with us from 4 to 5. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.